Welcome to another episode from Tech Life Stories. On the podcast today, I have Weston Morris. Weston is a senior director at Unisys, where he spent the whole of his career, which is a really interesting loyalty from you, Weston. And I'd love to hear more about that shortly. You've also run your own podcast called Digital Workplace Deep Dive. You've recently been a speaker at the ISG Future Summit in New York. I can see you've got a background in a degree in computer science. Obviously, I'm from London, as my listeners know, but you're in the US. You might want to start off by talking and introducing yourself a little bit and where you are from the US as well.
Yeah, I'm based in Southeast Michigan, although I was originally born in Brazil. All of my school years were in Florida. I keep moving further north for some reason, but
Okay,
yeah, I've been here in Michigan for many years now.
good. Okay, all right. Let's dig straight in regards to. I mean, look, we'll come on and talk about, and I mentioned there about how long you've been at Unisys all your career, but let's go all the way back. Let's go back to when we were, you know, a child and you were coming across technology and what kind of sparked the interest with technology and maybe your kind of journey of how you kind of got into the workplace, and then we can kind of question you a bit more as you go along.
Yeah, sure. Happy to discuss that. I think I have to give credit to my parents, and really a lot of people along the way. But in particular, I think about my mom and dad. My mom was born in a log cabin and delivered by a veterinarian on a homestead in northern Saskatchewan. And think how on earth is she going to expose me to technology?
Wow, I love it already.
But her personality is curious. She'd on the farm. She would always be asking, her dad, my grandpa, how does this work? What does that do? And, the machinery and the equipment and this, her mom was a school teacher in a one-room schoolhouse. And so, taught her to learn and the joy of reading. No TV or anything, right, on the farm, no electricity or anything. But as a result, she ended up being a missionary, very, very courageous, went to Bolivia. She's with her cousin. She tells stories about mountain roads with washouts and going up to mining towns and being the only these two blonde Swedish girls in a mining town with Wild West. Can you imagine with the gunslingers and things like that, and just like no fear, just amazing. And this curiosity, and of course she met my dad there, who'd been there already 10 years, and from him I learned the desire to figure out what's wrong with something and debug it. He was back then, the technology was radio, ham radio, things like that. And he, when he was down there in Bolivia, somebody threw away a ham radio that was broken and he figured out how to fix it. And he used that to communicate, all the way from, Bolivia to New York City, real time, Morse code. He made us learn to read in Morse code. It was kind of crazy. But I remember sitting in his lap in the shop in Brazil where he was fixing televisions and radios and things like that. And he had his soldering iron and he's looking at a circuit board and just methodically going through and debugging things. And I just, that was an important skill. And that tied with the curiosity, I'd say, well, what is this? And he'd say, well, that's a diode. And I go, what does it do? And he'd say, well, electricity can only go one way through it, but not the other way. And that makes this circuit do this and that. And I go, okay, that was good. And that was good enough for then. But I think as I got older, I would go, well, okay, well, how does the diode work? I know there's electrons. How come electrons can't go this way? They can only go this way through that little piece of equipment there. And so somehow my mom, after we moved to Florida, my mom got me access to a college. There was a college in town, a college library. And somehow I was able to check out books as a kid there, 10, 12 years old. And I would just go like she taught me to do, be curious, go read and find out, how do atoms work? How does electricity work? New technology. How does that diode work? You're looking at the science of the times. And those were just wonderful gifts that they gave me. And as I was getting close to, finishing school, that's about the time, if you remember, I don't know if you remember the phrase, the Trash 80, that was the Radio Shack TRS 80. The home computers started appearing. And
The era I grew up in Weston, so I know it very well.
So you know it, yeah. I
Yes.
mean, it had a little cassette tape for loading in data and everything.
100%.
It was no hard
100%.
drive, anything like that. Just, the very beginnings of it. And of course, I was never disciplined enough to save enough money to buy one. But my brother, who's younger than me, somehow he super disciplined. He did. And it was probably a broken one that my dad found that was sitting in some shelf where someone had bought it and he's fixing their TV and go, oh, what's that? Oh, it's a broken computer. So I'm sure he brought it home and he and my brother fixed it, got it working. But I was then fascinated with code. How do you get from a language, if then else's, if X is greater than 60, then do this, else do this. That's logic. How do you get that in this analog, system of transistors and resistors and diodes and capacitors? How do you get from one to the other?
Yeah.
I mean, and no one could explain it to me. And I was just, it was such a new technology. I says, I just want to know. So that's what I ended up studying in school. And I remember the day that it all came together. It was actually a graduate student teacher, so not even the head of the department, who spoke in such highfalutin terms that nobody seemed to understand what he was saying. But she was down to earth and took the time. It was an assembler class. We were building our own assembly language, building an assembler, and doing the opcodes and the machine language and all that. And I raised my hand and I says, okay, I don't get it. How does this opcode, a move, let's say, from moving from data from a piece of memory to a register into the CPU? That's an 080 in my assembler here. How does that actually do something? And she thought for a second. She said, well, that's not the point of this class. But she says, have you taken digital logic? Yes. So you know about NAND gates and shift registers and multiplexers. Yeah, I know that. Boolean logic? Yes. Okay. She says, okay, now take this opcode, this 080, and let's have wires coming out of it. Let's go to a NAND gate, a register, shift register to the memory. She's sketching on this blackboard. And I just remember when it all came together. I'm saying, oh my goodness, this is how you actually get logic, from these bits of electronics.
And this is a
And
graduate teacher.
it was, yeah, Susan. I remember her name.
Wow.
Just brilliant. I had her for 2 classes. She took the time to put it all together. It wasn't just like, okay, no, that's not this. We got to go to assembly language, and you'll figure that out later, maybe. Or why do you even care? It was just brilliant. And
was that just you and your own Weston, or was that like a whole class of you, like literally going through what she was demonstrating on the board, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I asked the question, but yeah, it was a whole class. It was a regular class in the school about assembly language, building your own assembler, and it was just part of the curriculum for computer science. And yeah, I just asked the question, but I love it that she took the time to put it all together, and then the joy that I had going, oh, finally, years ago that TRS-80, I see my brother programming. I'm going, don't know how that works, but now knowing how it worked down to the the electrons, the transistors. I just go, well, this is great. I know how it works. And then you might say, well, what difference does that make, to being a good programmer? And maybe it doesn't, but I feel like it did for me. That understanding how it worked to the bottom, because there were times, I think, when my first job, we'll probably get to that in a little bit, where I was supposed to be doing, high level language and PLM and ALGOL and that sort of thing. But then they needed me to go over to work with the electrical engineers, and they were doing everything in assembler and machine language. And for efficiency, to make sure they had the interrupt response routines down to the last microsecond. And if I hadn't had that, I wouldn't understand or appreciate the importance of this really tight, efficient code, or knowing how that works. So I think it did pay off.
I think it has. We know where you're at now, and we'll go along that journey shortly. I just want to rewind a little bit because one thing you mentioned to me that really stuck in my mind is obviously your dad in a shop in Bolivia with this TV equipment, and you seeing how he's doing things and you questioning him. So I think it's a great example of like learning on the job. I mean, I know you were as a kid then, but I think back to myself because obviously I run my own recruitment consultancy. I've kind of got that little bit of entrepreneurial spirit from my dad because he had run a couple of different businesses and he would always be at the forefront of driving and wanting to be a business owner and take a few risks. And I've learned that from him. And I learned that from being a kid and seeing some of the successes he had and some of the mistakes that he went through. But for you is, a point in case in a similar circumstance that you could see there in front of your own eyes, your dad taking things apart, welding them together, learning how the intricacies of inside a TV unit or radio unit works. I think it's fantastic. Great learning curve, right?
It is. And I do remember at some point in his career of fixing televisions, when the company that he worked for was insisting on swapping out boards, and he absolutely hated that. He quit. He says, "I'm doing my own business. Why am I throwing away this board when it's just one transistor?" He would
Yeah, mad.
diagnose it. They'd say, "That's too much time. You're taking too much time on that." But today we consider the cost of recycling and green. This whole notion of planned obsolescence is horrible, right? And he was totally against that. And I see that type of thinking is very important in today's world.
Yeah, no, very much so. I'd love to know what happened to all those really large, big, bulky televisions. Whether we could have recycled them in some way in today's society. Even PC monitors, right? There were big, bulky things on our desks, but we're all flat screened up now at the moment, aren't we?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you got to kind of school. You're doing your degree. Obviously, had kind of computer science. That's what you were focusing on. Whilst you're studying, you're thinking about a career in technology. Did you know exactly the path you wanted to take in the technology sector? Or was you still a bit unsure? And then what was your first job, and how did that come about?
Wow, that's a thoughtful question. I mean, I certainly could not have predicted me doing what I'm doing today. I figured, oh, programming. I'm just going to be a programmer forever.
Okay.
Why would that ever end, right? And now we've got Copilot, GitHub creating software for people. And there was a whole question really on that as to will the programmers of the future who don't know how things work under the hood and haven't gone through the pain of having failures and things like that, relying on AI to write our software, will they be able to understand and debug it? I mean, that's a question for the future. I know you got some questions on the future in a moment, but yeah. So my first job right out of school was working for Burroughs, which has now become Unisys. They merged with Sperry. So two mainframe companies. So back in the day, they were called IBM and the Bunch. So there was IBM and Burroughs, Univac, NCR, Control Data, Honeywell, I think, were the group. And so two of those, the Univac or Sperry and Burroughs joined, become Unisys. But my first work was definitely programming. I loved it. Real time software development for laser printers, check processing equipment, working with electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, moving paper and sensors, and it was just really a lot of fun writing code for that and debugging. And I'm thinking about some of the challenges back then. This was before, today we have JPEG, right?
Yeah.
A standard for compressing images. What we were trying to do was reduce the labor of check processing. So you may recall that. So back then, let's go back into the 80s. If I was to write you a check, Con, you're in London, I would write the check, mail it to you, you would get it, you would take it to your bank. And back then, the law was the check had to be sent all the way back to the originating bank for you to get the money transferred. Remember, there's the delay,
Mad. Mad.
and that went through multiple check processors that were reading I should have brought a little example, the micker at the bottom of the check, the magnetic ink on the bottom, reading it, figuring out where does this go. Part of it, went to what bank. So first you had to get it to another country. And then here in the US, it went through the Federal Reserve System. There were 13, I think 12 or 13 different Federal Reserve branches. It would go to one and they'd hand it off to another. And then it would finally get back to my bank. And then they would take at the end of the month, all the checks for every customer at my bank and resort them so that I would get mailed all of my checks for that month. I don't know if you remember that, but mom, grandma, our grandparents probably have boxes of checks still really important, right, in their closet. But just think of all the labor. And there was airplanes carrying
Yeah.
it,
Mad.
really urgent. God, you got deadlines. You've got to get these checks sent. So the thinking was, how do we get rid of that, automate that? And the idea was, well, could we capture an image of the check? And today we take this for granted. Even if you get a check today, you might just take your phone out, scan it, boom, it turns it. It's called truncating it. It turns it into an image. Electronic file transfer is put into place. All that was being invented, back in the late 80s. And the challenges we faced were, well, how do you store this image? I mean, the image can be, for a check, raw data could be close to, a gigabyte, half a gig or something like that.
Yeah.
Back then, I remember seeing the first 5 gigabyte hard drive that they brought in commercial. It was like as big as an air fryer and just as noisy, right? Today's value, probably $30,000 for a 5 gig hard drive.
Wow.
So you could put how many checks on there? 5?
No.
It's ridiculous. So that's why we were forced to look at compression. And like I said, these compression algorithms didn't exist. So some of my early patents were with this check processing. Some of those things are still in use today with some of the check processing that we do, which was really cool. But we had to shrink down the image. And like I said, things like JPEG didn't exist. The only compression standard was CCITT for faxes. That was it.
Yeah.
Very basic compression algorithm. So we were having to come up with that. And then the software development for processing it, shipping it, the algorithms on it. It was a lot of fun. So that was, where I got started, was doing, real software engineering
Hmm.
for, applications that I could see had real value to the real world. It was a lot of fun.
It's really interesting you mentioned about the check clearing because I don't think I had an experience or sending a check to another country, but definitely within the UK, I think I used to receive checks from my grandparents or family members. But yes, I think it would always be 5 days later it clears and goes into your account, right? Something along those lines. But I also remember the credit card transactions. When you used to buy someone a credit card, you used to give your credit card over. They used to have like a little shit, yeah, and they used to like put a piece of paper there. It's so when you think back, it was so well. I call it old school stuff, but it is old school stuff, and technology's come so far in that time. But yeah, I thought I'd just mention it. But obviously, so your first job, you're in Burroughs, which is obviously now Unisys. You're doing software programming. What's next? Like, where does that take you once your foot's in the door?
Well, you just interviewed Alan Nance. I just love that interview you had with him. And he revealed things that I didn't realize were going on at the time. So
Okay.
we moved from that, I'll say, technology era, information processing, to this service economy he talks about, right? So
Hmm.
we had to realize that we can't just take a bunch of engineers that at that time mostly looked like me, white male, put them in a room, shake the box, see what comes out. Oh, it's technology. We'll sell it. Well, 70s and 80s, you could do that.
Yeah.
Anything that was produced, technology wise, oh, we'll find a way of using it. Well, that ended. People realizing, no, we're not getting value out of this. We're not getting the cost reduction or the return on investment. And so Alan talks about this move to this service economy where we've got complex systems, not just one computer, but multiple computers communicating, and systems, applications. If you're in banking, multiple things, HR systems, and so on. You need an IT service management program in place. And so he talks about how he was key for, one of the early founders of ITIL, the rules for engagement for figuring out how we do IT from a service point of view.
Hmm.
And that obviously changed Unisys. I didn't realize it at the time what was happening, but we moved from that, put a bunch of engineers in a box and build something, to let's move into consulting and providing services, not just technology, but services to customers. And I moved into consulting as a result. I remember one of my mentors, Joe Burkowski, who has passed away, a great guy. He talked to me one day. He says, Weston, this is a lot of fun, but I think we need to move into consulting. And he talked me into it. There was 3 other people that he pulled in. He kind of led the team, and we started working with consulting. And again, I found those qualities that my parents had given me, the curiosity, the debugging, just came into play. I just loved learning how a bank worked, like we talked about the money, moving, checks moving, and things like that, and the challenges along the way, the security issues, where fraud could come into play. Or if we were working, I did several projects for state governments. So for example, here in Michigan, the unemployment insurance program, when they went from it being based on a phone call or a letter you write in to
Yeah.
apply, to being on the internet. And so first I had to figure out, well, what were their processes? And I started sketching it out. I was in a big conference room, and I thought I would just use part of the wall. And I am sketching and reading and sketching and flow charts and sketching, and I'm going around the room, around the room. I just barely had enough wall space to document it. And then I took a step back and looked at it and realized I am seeing what's happening in the state government in Lansing, the committees coming to compromises and making decisions. These if then else's. A lot of stuff is done for the UAW. Surprise, surprise. Special case where the United Auto Workers Union would, big here in Michigan, would get a special case in how their unemployment was processed versus an average person. And I'm seeing that take place over and over again on the wall. And just understanding that, what's happening behind the scenes of the
Hmm.
services that we use, whether it's at a bank or a hospital or an airline, as a result of consulting, it exposed me to that. So that curiosity, understanding how things work really came into play. And then the debugging too. There's always things that are not going to work. And so that challenge of how do you diagnose a problem, breaking it into parts, getting additional data to be able to, figure things out. And I think one of the things that I learned early on was, if at all possible, bake into your system access to data, recording the data, logs of things that you can then go back to see when something's not working, why it's not working.
Yeah.
Because that happy case, you can code for the happy case. That's great, but if 90% of your coding is really going to be for the unhappy cases, the things that break or the weird things that people will throw at it.
Just out of interest, when you're in your software engineering role and you're moving into consulting, I know you brought some of your skill sets across, but wasn't there like a bit of a transition period there as well for you, or did you just kind of like hit the ground running? Like consulting is, a
Yeah.
lot of it is. I mean, your communication skills have got to be second to none in consulting, if you ask me. And you mentioned there about the processes and drawing everything out around. Like for me, it's a different role, right? So, how did you know that you were kind of cut out for it, or did you not? Was you kind of winging it as you were doing? I don't know. Tell me, tell me what you were going through at the time.
Well, you certainly hit on some important skills that are needed in consulting that you don't need if you're in the back room just coding, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Being able to communicate with people, to draw them out. You've got to learn what they're doing. And sometimes people are hesitant to share that because they're thinking, oh, you're doing this to take away my job. And that's a barrier, of course. But I will say there was things I did wrong for sure. I remember one of the first projects I was working on. It was for a potential client. It was government related in Illinois, and they outlined the problem. The salesperson whispered in her ear, "They prefer this technology vendor," and I looked at the rest of the consultants. That's terrible. That's the worst. That's the worst choice. We should just recommend this. This is the best technology here.
Mm.
And we were insistent on it. And the salesperson was like, I don't know, but we insisted on it. We put it together. It really, I think, was the best solution from a technology perspective. But we failed to take into account, there's politics involved. There's reasons why, maybe a backdoor relationship, who knows, with this one vendor, or previous history, or who knows, a variety of reasons that we just failed to take into account because we knew best, right? We're the consultants. This is the best solution. And like I said, it probably was technology-wise, but it wasn't right for that client. We lost the bid. Spent a ton of time putting that bid together. And that was frustrating at first. First, I blamed them. It's like, they should know better. But I realized, no, that is another key part of consulting, is taking into account the human side of things that's going on with the customer as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So you're in this consulting type role now. What next? Where does that take Weston next within his kind of career at Unisys? Because, like I said, you've been there all your life. You've been there, so we'll get to the current role eventually. But where does that take you after your consulting type role?
Well, I'm gonna have to go back to what your interview with Alan Nance. It was very revealing to me to understand how things have changed over time. When you're in it, you don't necessarily see it, but having somebody shine a light on it, especially after the fact, is very helpful. So one of the things that Alan talked about is, we actually began engaging with him. This would have been in the last 10 years. We realized that things were changing from the service economy to the experience economy. We didn't call it that. Alan is calling that out now, this idea of the experience economy, but we were focused on experience. When we were designing our services that we would provide to our customers at Unisys, we were focused on the service. And then we say, well, we now have to measure that service. So SLA, service level agreements. And we would measure little nitpicky things like, the average handle time, or the mean time to repair, or how long would it take to make sure all of the patches are deployed to your PCs, and that sort of thing. Or if you're on the cloud side of things at the data center, what's your uptime for a server and things like that. And we continue to be really good with that. Our customers say, you really do a good job of delivering. Your people become our people. But something was missing. And it was that so-called watermelon effect, right? Our numbers, the SLAs all look green. They're good on the outside. You open it up and you ask an average person a customer, how do you think about IT? And they'd say, IT, yeah, it's okay,
Mm.
or it's terrible, and we're saying, what's missing here? These SLAs are all green. We're delivering a great service. Why is it the average user is still unhappy with IT?
Mm.
And we're realizing we're not focusing on their experience,
Mm.
their end-to-end experience. And so we called in experts. At the time it was Citrus Collab. Now I know Alan's company, Experience Collab, partnered with Neil Keating from Brighthorse, another great guy, Rayanne Bruno. Just excellent people that really understand and are trying to push this idea of experience management, and then moving from SLAs to XLAs, that is something that we need to do. And this was happening in parallel with the change in my roles, where I was moving from, client, really being involved with client delivery and consulting, to taking a step back and taking ownership of defining our offerings, the services that we're providing to our customers. And that's when I started asking the question, well, what's wrong? Why what's still missing? And it was
Yeah.
this move from the service economy to the experience economy. So in my role here now of portfolio development and defining what our offerings are, that notion of experience management has become super important, and focusing on what is the actual experience that our customers are getting, because there is a strong connection between our clients' customers
Mm-hmm.
and their experience. So you might imagine an airline. Their customers are the passengers. The experience that the passengers get, in part, now we're not totally responsible for it, but in part, is going to come from the experience, the IT experience we give to our clients' employees, especially their frontline workers, right? The gate
100%.
agents, the flight crew, and those sorts of folks.
Yeah, I completely get that. I just want what you were saying there about that going from that service kind of economy to the experience economy. Am I right in saying at that time you said this about 10 years ago when you maybe engaged with Alan and some of these other individuals? Was Unisys at that stage one of the early adopters of that, or was you kind of chasing your tail, noticing some of your competitors had switched to the experience model and was following suit? Where was Unisys at that stage?
There wasn't a lot of talk about it
Okay.
at all. It was a very, quiet discussion, and there was a lot of doubt that this was real, that this
Mm.
was important. I think what really kicked it into gear for us and for a lot of people was the pandemic. All of a sudden, you had the great what was it called? Where people were leaving their work, they were quitting.
The Great
That
Resignation.
Great Resignation. Thank you. Yes, the Great Resignation. Businesses were begun to worry about their employee experience, and they were also, even without that, at the very beginning, when they sent everybody to work from home, they were thinking, what is their experience like at home, from a security perspective, but also, are they able to get their job done? Do they have the devices that they need? Do we even know what devices they need? What about their internet? And how are they going to communicate and collaborate? And then the notion started to come into play. Well, what about the social side of things? They're not interacting with a physical human somewhere. How do we get communicating with them better and collaborating? And the video capability, Zoom exploded, right? Microsoft began catching up with
Yeah.
Teams, and now is doing a really good job with that. All of those things, the experience of remote workers. And then as the pandemic ended, there was the beginning of the return to office. There was a lot of talk about hybrid work, and that's where we realized there's value in measuring the experience of employees as they return to the office, those that are at home, and maybe the same person as they journey from one day they're at home and another day they're in the office, or maybe they're in sales and they're out, in the field. What is the experience of each of those personas
Mm-hmm.
or those role changes, those location changes, measuring that experience in a tangible way with the goal of coming up with an action. Now, I think that was one of the mistakes early on with XLAs. It was just a measure, a number. It's 6 this month, and now it's 6.7, or dropped to 5.8. Is that good? Is that bad? Is it having a difference on our business? And we realized we needed to start connecting the dots with that. I think we were early in making that happen. And it's really become an important component. We realize so how do we deliver that? We realize that it's an important service all on its own to actually come in and measure that, because some technology is needed. There's certain skills. but it impacts every one of our other offerings. And we're also realizing that when we started collecting experience data, so for example, for your device con, we could determine when it is the appropriate time to replace your PC.
Mm-hmm.
And we realized we could start telling our customers, hey, that calendar model that you're using every 3 years, 1/3 every year, you replace your devices and you just keep doing that in perpetuity. You shouldn't do that anymore. We've got data from experience of your people to tell you which devices need to be replaced. We can even tell you that you've got way too powerful a machine being delivered to this role. You're wasting money.
Yeah.
That i7, you could get away with an i3. Maybe you can get they're just using SaaS applications. You just need a browser-based device,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. Thin client or Chromebook or something like that. So this additional data is not just about experience, but it now comes back to how you make decisions about your business and the devices you get, when you change them. And also another thing that I remember Alan, it was very eye-opening when Alan shared this with us, that about 61% of people, I think you used this stat on your interview with him, do not call the service desk. And we've all been that person, I'm sure. Why do we not contact the service desk? Well, I'm in the middle of something. It's kind of working. Or maybe I don't expect them to fix it. Or I don't even know this is a problem. I don't know how bad my situation is because it's just the way it works. It
Yeah.
takes 10 minutes to boot in the morning, whatever. I get a coffee. Finding the people that are suffering in silence is a very important, activity in terms of improving productivity for the employees. Giving all of that time back to employees so they can do their job because of the experience data we're collecting is really exciting. And I think we are, going back to your original question, I think we are leading the market in that space.
Good. I mean, quite a few takeaways there, and I will come back to some of those. But just to touch on then, so your role at the moment now, Weston, in regards to kind of the global strategy, is so experience is one part of what you do. What else is your current role? What remit does it have, and what do you do on a day-to-day basis? Would you say?
Yeah. So within Unisys, we have different business units. The business unit that I'm part of is the digital workplace side of things. It's
Mm-hmm.
anything to do with the end user, right? We also
Yep.
have a cloud. There's the mainframe, of course. There's business applications, but in the space that I'm in, the digital workplace, I'm concerned about anything that impacts the productivity of our clients' employees for them to do their job. So I view that as two things. One is what are the services that we need to provide to enable a person to do their job?
Mm-hmm.
And then when that doesn't work, what are the services to support them, to get them back to being whole again? So
Okay.
on the enablement side, it's like giving them a device, like we just talked about, giving them an application, making sure it's secure, giving them access to communication and collaboration tools like we're using here right now,
Mm-hmm.
getting access to um, knowledge and information, being able to search on things and find things, being able to create documents and collaborate with other people. All of that's the enablement side of things, and then the support side of things, which is still a pretty large part of the business in IT, is when something breaks. First, can we proactively detect it and fix it, which we talked about earlier?
Mm-hmm.
But if not, when somebody contacts us, and I'm using a symbol of a phone here because
Yeah.
that's the traditional method of calling the call center, right? But also chat or other means, talking to a bot for getting help, or maybe in-person support through a tech cafe or a virtual tech cafe, using merged reality with, smartphones can now support that, or goggles to let people get access to help when they need it, how they need it. One of the cool things that Stacy Harder on my team has put in place for one of our customers is you walk into a conference room, and maybe you've experienced this, Con, where you walk in, you've got an important meeting, and you've never been in this conference room before, and you see wires unplugged, and you're like,
Many
oh
times, many times.
how do I get connected? Or I've got my device, I'm supposed to project something. This is really important. And you've got like 10 minutes. Well, what she's got is these QR codes set up in the rooms where you just come in. It says scan me. You scan it. The QR code can either take you to help an article if you got more time, or it can directly connect you through merged reality to a remote expert that maybe not even be in this building, to guide you through where you're seeing that person's hand. Here, take this cable, plug it in here, maybe marking it up virtually, and in 5 minutes you're made whole again.
Yeah.
I mean, that I just love that she has done that kind of, it's a simple thing, but it's all about, experience and productivity.
I think, I mean, what you've described there around the experience, I think, and having a different methods in which someone can contact you is so crucial in today's world in technology, right? Because yes, maybe when you first got into tech and when I first got into recruitment, mine's 25 years ago now, it was very much a phone-based role. And funny enough, I ran a poll today on LinkedIn. I don't know if you saw it at all. And I said, what is your preferred method of contact when being contacted by a recruiter?
I love that.
And I gave four options. I gave phone, email, LinkedIn, or other, and state what the other is. And actually, it was really interesting. Already, I mean, it's not finished yet, the poll, but it's actually a third each, effectively. A third said phone, a third said LinkedIn, a third said email. Only one person wrote other, and it was to have a generative AI chat box, basically, for a WhatsApp message. And I thought to myself, if I'd asked this poll 25 years ago, one, there wasn't LinkedIn anyway, but probably phone would have been very high up on what people's communication expectations were. Whereas I think now it's very, very different. I think, and we need to, everyone needs to, or businesses need to cater for not just their own internal stuff, but their external clients in regards to having different methods of communication. And I think the way you described about having to scan the QR code to set yourself up within the office and having different methods to do that, I think it's fantastic. And I think technology is there for us to enable things like that now, right? We are at the forefront of technology, and we might as well use it in cases like that as best as possible. Because, like you said, there are some. I know one place at the top of my head now where I would go, and there are wires everywhere, and I would be a little bit nervous what I'm going to plug in. There's nothing like a QR code for me to scan to figure it out. So I love what you said there. And what Unisys are doing there is fantastic. And we'll talk about it a little bit more. There was another thing that you mentioned a little while, rewind a little bit. You spoke about experience data, and I want to touch on that a little bit because I think it's a really important point. And I wanted to, the first question I wanted to ask was that, have you been tracking that data for many years, or has it only been more of a recent thing since the experience side of things has come into play?
So I think when we started, we first began exposed to, what the industry calls DEX tools, digital experience tools, and there's several players in that space. And you can look on, I think there's a Gartner Magic Quadrant coming out soon where they'll be ranked, and you can see the leaders in that space. But we worked with several of them, but we definitely see a difference in the capabilities of them. But that is an important component. We, in the past, relied solely on the ticketing data we would have gotten from EMC or ServiceNow. But as we just said, that's only 39% of people are reporting an issue. There's another 61% that aren't. So with that data, we're missing a big chunk of what's really happening with a customer. With the DEX tool, it's deploying an agent on every device, and it's collecting in real time anything you can see in perfmon if you're in Windows, or the log file, boot time, crashes, things like that, network usage, CPU usage. And then that can be used to create a score. But that's what I call is just PC happiness. That's just a portion of it. I mean, right now we're using an application, a SaaS application, for unified communication here, right, to do this
Very
podcast.
much so. Very, very much so.
We need to measure that. I call that UC happiness, especially since the pandemic. That's become such an important part of our work and how we work. But then the third component is the people happiness, actually asking Khan, how do you feel about the devices, the equipment, the services you're getting, what's working, what's not, and collecting that data. Putting all of that together, and then maybe even correlating it, slicing and dicing it by persona. One of our customers, one of their roles that's very important to them, they invent cool new household products, is their engineers. So we said, okay, let's measure the experience of those engineers, and we'll look at it differently than everybody else. And if we just rolled them into the whole population of thousands of users, we might see that the experience is trending quite well, or might be a little dip or something. But if we drill down into it, we may find that those engineers, a few hundred people, are all having a problem.
Mm.
and their experience dipped tremendously. So you can't just look at the all of it. You need to be able to slice and dice by region, by role, by persona. Um, you could even, if they allow it, you could look at it by age group, by gender, to see if something's happening where there's unconscious decisions going into place in IT or even HR that's affecting the experience of different groups of people. But in this case here with the engineers, it's really important to know that they're having a good experience or not, and spend time, extra time and energy, keeping them happy so that they're not leaving the company and taking the intellectual property with them, or work, maybe staying with the company but being not productive, being late to market and creating that next new cool thing that they're working on.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of sources of data correlating it. That's a lot of the work that has to come into play. We realized we didn't have an organization, a service organization, to do that. And this is one of the aha moments we got from Alan and Neil and Rayanne is you need an experience management office, a group of people that's their sole job is to look at this data, and then they can give insights to other groups, your imaging team, or your PC, management, or your Teams team, Zoom team, or whatever, for the changes that they need to make to improve experience.
Do you think you're at a stage where you've cracked that, or is that still? Are you still going through a learning curve with it at the moment? Would you say?
Well, I think we're doing a very good job with that. What I'm looking at now is what additional data is out there. We talked about three types. I mentioned earlier, how Stacy's team has put together, managed meeting room services. What about measuring the experience of the managed meeting room? That's nobody's PC, right? That's a shared device that
True.
no one's going to call in on. And it can affect lots of different people. Like the CEO comes in and wants to do a presentation. That's really important, right? So capturing data from the managed meeting room. Also on her team, they're looking at capturing data of elsewhere in the building. Now more and more of smart buildings are having air quality sensors, or is a room being used, or what's the power consumption, the HVAC consumption. It would be great to be able to tap into additional sources of the data like that, and weave that in, because that's going to deliver a different set of insights, maybe that go back to facilities, not just to IT or HR as they're looking at employee experience today.
Yeah. Okay. And it just comes to my mind now. The stat you mentioned, was it 61% of users don't report any issues? Is that right?
That's the number I'm getting from Alan. Yeah,
Okay.
and from our experience, that's pretty close. Yeah.
Okay. Let's say it's your figures or Alan's figures, whichever way. But share, those 61%. How does Unisys then try and get data from those individuals if they're not coming to the forefront and giving that data? What proactive methods are you taking to talk to them? I know you mentioned, obviously, you want to go and you communicate and talk to them, but sometimes they might not want to be. They might not want to talk to you, right? So, are you doing anything proactive to kind of get that information from those 61%?
Yeah. So first of all, being able to collect data from a DEX platform is essential. We call it XLA 1.0. You got to have that. That's collecting the data from the device, the operational data, the crashes, the boot time, things like that, network usage, CPU. That's being collected from everybody.
Okay.
And that reveals a lot of things that that even if you do call the service desk, think about, Con, maybe the last time you called, you're calling about a problem you had right now. But if the agent has access to this data, for the last 2 weeks on your device, you might be calling about a blue screen, for example, and they go, yeah, we'll take care of that. But by the way, I see you've had 3 Outlook crashes in the last month. It's unrelated to the blue screen, but we can take care of that at the same time. So having access to that data is not just in a reactive mode like we call the service desk, but this XMO is able to look across all the devices and find the 500 people that are having this Outlook crash, figure out what's causing it, make the fix. And it could be something that's happening periodically, and put something in automatically to automatically detect and automatically resolve as time goes on.
Okay.
So that's one side, but you are hitting on something important too. I like it that we hate being surveyed, and it is important to try to collect the human side of things, and there's a lot of science to that. Rand Bruno talks about that. Neil Keating does as well, where and Happy Signals does a marvelous job with this as well, in collecting information, like say 1/12 of your population every month, instead of one survey a year, because that's already out of date. If, for example,
True.
if we were
True.
to use a survey in March of 2020 to figure out how people are feeling about work, based on a survey that was taken even at the end of 2019, it would have been garbage,
Mm.
right? The pandemic hit, it changed everything. People's experience immediately changed. And so you need an ongoing collection of data and information. The surveys have to be simple. I mean, I'm not an expert on survey science, but just some of the things I picked up, I'm realizing there's some things that you need to do, and maybe somewhere in the company you're already doing a survey. Who is that? Probably HR, right?
Yeah.
Work with them to maybe modify their survey a little bit to include some of the IT related things you're concerned with. Maybe make sure that they're doing it, collecting it frequently enough, and with a population where they're actually able to help you with that data.
Yeah.
It's not easy. I'm glad you brought it up, because it is actually the hardest part.
I think so.
Collecting.
I think I know from my experience before, when I worked in organisations, I would get emails from HR with surveys and delete. It's too easy, and I think there needs to be a bit more of a proactive way of doing it. Whether that's, I always thought the good time to get someone when they're really focused on themselves and that we can 100% get their attention is at an appraisal stage, like a performance development type stage, and whether you can include it at that stage, maybe. I think that's a good one. But I'm sure there are other suitable methods that work in organisations. I just always thought that was a good one that would work if I was an employee. I want to move on a little bit because we spoke previously about generative AI. And I know you was a speaker recently at the ISG Summit, and I think you spoke about this quite a bit, but I'm kind of keen to kind of hear your thoughts about generative AI, and if you've adapted that within the business at the moment, or what you're trying to do with generative AI as a business, and how it's going to better the workforce, should we say?
Yeah, I don't think we can have a kind of podcast in 2024 without mentioning AI or generative AI, especially generative AI. That's true, but it's definitely going to just be showing up in so many places. It's going to be in our cars. It's just going to be everywhere,
Yeah.
and it is going to affect jobs. I saw one quote that was pretty. I wish I could remember who to attribute it to. Maybe we can find out, put it in the notes. But they said that you're not likely to lose your job in whole due to AI. You're more likely to lose your job to somebody that knows how to use AI better than you.
Good quote. Very good quote.
And we've taken that to heart, because for example, Microsoft, I think, is really the one that really got everyone's attention with generative AI, OpenAI, Copilot. It's showing up. There's so many. There's like 100 and something Copilots now that are available. I can't even name them all, that are just showing up in their technology. And there's some companies that are feeling, well, I'm just going to turn it on, and we should see, Microsoft says 14 minutes. You get 14 minutes back a day. But will you really? Maybe not, if you just go and turn it on. That you don't get back to that point of, you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose it to someone who knows how to use AI. So I think there needs to be some organizational change management, some training, and ongoing, to help people to understand what it is, how it's different than using other tools today. For example, if we remember when Google first came out, we just were thrilled. I could type in and search for anything. But there's a big difference between that, how we did that, versus how you interact with generative AI. Generative AI allows you to take the output of one prompt and feed it into another and refine it. I give an example of somebody in HR that perhaps says, hey, I want to look at all the policies and anything that's written, blogs or whatever, emails on remote work. I want to collect that because I want to put together and use that as a draft. Okay, AI does that really well. Now you can say, generative AI does. Now you can say to generative AI, now, you know what, refine that, put a role on it, associate a role with it. I'm an HR leader and I want to communicate this as a policy. Let's refine this. And it will do that. It'll change the wording, it'll eliminate things. It's now got some context. You can't do that with an old-fashioned Google search, right? It's one and done. If you want to change it, you start all over again, right? Till you get the answer you want. Here, you're feeding one thing to another. And that's a different mindset that we have to train on. Maybe the last step for the HR person is, I says, okay, great. By the way, we're a multinational. We kind of use English as our lingua franca for everybody. Um, let's reword this so that anybody that's got maybe just exposure to English for just 2 years or less, learning English, would understand it. And it is amazing to see how it will reword it, right? So I've gone from getting information to setting a role to refining it for an audience. That's, you have to train people to how to do that. We
Yeah.
haven't been thinking that way. And the other thing is, going back to the data. I'm going to just share a little anecdote. This was in the news recently, where a passenger wanted to get a bereavement rate on a flight. So they spoke with the chatbot, and the chatbot says, "No problem, just book the flight. Within 90 days, submit your paperwork. You'll get the refund." The person goes to the funeral, comes back, submits the paperwork, gets an email saying, "Ooh, no, you didn't follow the process." He says, wait a minute. The chatbot said all I had to do was this, and submitted the screenshots and everything. They go, "Oh, you didn't read that little disclaimer at the bottom that says, that you really have to check your answers." And we get that with every Copilot response,
Yeah.
right? It says,
100%.
I can't quote it exactly, but you better go check your answers. We may hallucinate, right? They said, "We're not going to pay you. You didn't follow the instructions." And so he took them to court. Small claims court. The judge says, "Oh, no way. This chatbot is a representative of your company. You cannot stand behind, the flaws of generative AI. You owe them." And so, it wasn't a big loss, but it does highlight that you're not automatically going to get a return on investment by just turning this on. You do have to pay attention to things. And so what was missing here was they're paying attention to data. If you think like our company, 150 years, if I was to do a search on working from home, I'm sure I'm going to find something from 2000, a document. Is that what I want to base my decisions on in terms of policy? The pandemic has happened since then. No, I want to be able to know that that is out of date. So what we're recommending to people is, as we consult with them on how to use generative AI, is really, let's start with your data. Let's classify it. Let's first of all look at it in terms of how confidential it is. Is it public? Is it something that you really can just share within the company, or is it really confidential that only certain people should see? And then the temporal nature, that's the one we often forget about. Is it out of date? Because the generative AI is going to find it. We may not, in our searches, necessarily find an old document, or will this instantly go, "Oh yeah, 1985? I don't think so." The bot may include it and use it as gospel, so to speak. And then you've got the roles. So, Microsoft says that it respects the access rights, but only if you've defined them. You need to be thinking about what are the documents that a CFO should see, an HR leader, a contractor, anyone in between. So that is a foundational thing that we're seeing is essential if you're going to get a return on investment or be able to safely use generative AI as it's being rolled out in your company.
And has it actually been rolled out within Unisys or not at this stage?
Yes. And so we've done something interesting. We've done, Gartner talks about doing an A/B test, where you give it to some people and give them training, and others you don't give training. We've gone with an ABC test where we have not given it to some. We've given it to some without any training. That's the test to see, will you really get any ROI? Interesting. Some people have turned it back and said, I'm not getting any value out of this, turn it off. And then the other group where we get all the love, right? Where you get the podcasts, you get the access to a community where you share ideas, a library where people are posting prompts. Hey, this worked for me. There's like over 100 plus prompts that people have shared already in just the last few weeks that people have posted there. And we're seeing a big difference, right? And the value of doing that is the people that don't get it, you're able to get a baseline. This is how productive they're going to be in meetings and other things as they create artifacts. That baseline you can now actually compare against what's the value of just giving it to people or investing in training. And we're seeing a big difference. It is absolutely essential that you provide some sort of training, a community, from a security perspective, if nothing else. But I would say more importantly, from my point of view, how do you get value out of it and be productive?
And have you noticed those that that have said that they're not interested in it? Are they a certain age range or a certain demographic? Does that the data, does that tell you anything at all?
I asked that same question, Con.
Great minds think alike, as they say, Weston.
They won't let us look at that level of personal data.
Okay, fair play. I have to ask the question though, right?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it though. Yeah.
Uh, I think, look, generative AI is here to stay, right? It's the future of technology. It's what everyone just talks about at the moment, but there is more going on besides AI. I suppose before, if you took AI out of it, where else do you see um, some technological advancements happening over the next kind of 5 to 10 years, and what kind of challenges do you envisage off the back of that, or even off the back of generative AI? Obviously, we spoke about training there, but are there any other kind of challenges you see over the next 5 to 10 years based on either AI or anything else that you think might be coming up through the ranks over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I'd say there's three. I mean, one that's been around for a while and people are still figuring out how to get the most value out of it is blockchain.
Yeah.
I won't dig into that one too much, but more, I would say there's a lot of interest in quantum computing.
Mm.
Our whole encryption system is based on the fact that computers of today, it's in the class of what they call the hard problems, NP problems. It would just take an infinite amount of time to crack it if you follow the rules properly, as opposed to the P problems, which are easier. So we're on we're on the threshold, I would say, of some challenging times here. When quantum computing becomes cost effective and something that's ubiquitous, or even before then, when it's available to certain people. I think back to the Future movie when Biff went into the future and he stole that almanac of all the games that have been won. For the last 20 years, went back in time and started using it for gambling, and he won every bet. Right? He knew, so he stole something that had future value. Right? He had to wait for it, and there's people that are doing that. They're stealing encrypted data. They're targeting it specifically. It's not just any data. It's data they know that'll still have value in 5 years or 10 years. I don't know, like the recipe for Coke. I'm just thinking, but stuff like that, right? They're going to keep it. They're sitting on it. And they're waiting for quantum computing to become real enough that they can cost effective. They can now throw this at it in 5 years, decrypt it, and now use that to their advantage for whatever purposes. So we've got an initiative looking at post-quantum encryption and analyzing for our customers, is your data at risk? And we're finding there's a difference between data in motion versus data at rest. There's different protocols used there. And what can you do to protect yourself? And part of it goes back to that data classification. What data do I really need to worry about in a temporal nature? Does it matter in 5 years? That kind of thing. But also, what are the technologies that I need to begin moving to so that I'm as quantum safe in the future as possible? So that's one area. Another is this idea of digital twins, and this actually came from our mainframe side of the business. And I just love. There's so many good ideas. We're doing some quantum stuff that came from the mainframe folks too, that we're trying to use in digital workplace. But an example here is where we've got people like myself that have been with the company 40, maybe 50 years that are taking care of the mainframe technology and capturing not just what software does. That can be done by generative AI, but why that software does what it does. So interviewing these people and understanding the processes, and they can refer back to, oh yeah, in 2000 there was a federal law that did this or that, and that's why we've got this a special routine, and we still need to take that into account for special cases. The code's not going to tell you that, but capturing the why and the how software works, and it's brilliant. It's already being used inside of our company. So I saw that and said, wow, our customers, there's many that have that same sort of problem. In the U.S. government, it's a large percentage of state and local government of employees that are eligible for retirement. Well over 50%.
Yeah.
There's one study that I saw. If they leave, they're taking that knowledge with them. So how do you capture that so that you can process fishing licenses and driver's licenses and tax reporting and things like that, especially the why? So this idea is something that I'm really excited about developing here, is this idea of digital twin as a solution, that can be provided for people. So those are just a couple different technologies that I'm really excited about in the future.
Wow, so many great insights. I loved hearing about, like I say, blockchain's a completely different subject. You can talk about the quantum computing and encryption side. I think you're onto something there. I think, like I say, the data side and the value of the future of that data is so key. And the digital twin side as well. Loved hearing about it. So many great insights. And do you know when I've had a good podcast is when I look at the time and I'm like, wow, where's the time gone? And we've hit an hour. We are an hour's podcast, so we're coming to the end. But there are a couple of things I do want to touch on before we do finish up. One is your podcast, because you do run a podcast yourself called Digital Workplace Deep Dive. Just tell the listeners a little bit about it and some of the guests you have on it. Is it just Unisys guests, or do you have external guests as well?
Yeah, certainly there are a fair number of Unisys guests. I try to get people that are working on some of this cool stuff and have them share that. But also, we have our customers, we have partners that we talk to, analysts in the industry. There's been a couple CEOs that I've interviewed. The goal, my goal is, am I interested in what they're telling me? And if it is, then I believe that the audience will be as well. And giving glimpses of what's happening and how, especially in the area of digital workplace and IT, and how things are evolving in the future, where people have run into problems and how they've solved them too is always exciting.
Yeah, no, definitely, without doubt. Okay, and final bit, I always like to know a little bit about you on a personal level. So you tell me you're from Southeast Michigan. Tell me a bit about you, what you get up to outside of work, family, anything like that.
I've enjoyed sailing. It's something I've picked back up again. I did it as a teenager. One day, my brother called me and says, "Hey, I'm seeing these people on these sailboats. You remember those little sailboats we had?" And I says, "Yeah, that was a lot of fun." So I got my wife started with that. She's got her own, and in the summertime, we definitely
Yeah.
enjoy that here in Michigan.
Good. Okay. Perfect. Right. We are going to finish off. Is there anything else you want to add to the podcast before we end it?
This has been a lot of fun, and I tell you, I do appreciate your podcast. You do a beautiful job of getting into the insights of people and how any of us can learn from other people. And I think that's been one of the secrets that I've looked back on is be grateful. Look, anybody. I've got a person on my team fairly new to the industry. I listened to a podcast she just did recently about her journey. I'm going, wow. I'm learning from everybody,
Yeah.
and we can learn from everybody that we come across.
I 100% agree with that. And I know you, when I initially reached out to you, you were listening to my podcast, but I was also at the same time listening to your podcast. We were finding out a little bit about each other before we jumped online. But I think podcast is a great way to learn, and you can learn all the time. So thank you for the podcast that you do. I want to thank you for joining us today and sharing your story and some fantastic insights. I've learned so much, and I can't wait to hopefully have you on in the future again and share some more insights with us. It's a shame it's only an hour. I'm sure we could talk for hours on end. And if you're ever in the UK or in London, pay me a visit. We can always have a coffee and have a catch up. Okay.
That sounds fun. Thank you so much for the invite, Con. I really enjoyed it.
No problem at all. I'll catch up with you soon. Bye bye.